You've read the books, you've heard the phrase, heal your inner child. You've tried to sit in silence, to meditate, to feel, but nothing comes. Just numbness, just silence, just that echoing sense of emptiness that follows you no matter how many tools you collect. And deep down you start to wonder, what if I'm too far gone? What if I can't feel because there's nothing left? Carl Jung had a different answer. He believed the child is never gone, only hidden. Not by chance but by necessity, because for some of us the only way we survived was by disappearing, not physically, but emotionally. We dissociated, we froze. We became invisible in homes where being seen meant being hurt, in cultures where softness was weakness, in families where love was earned through silence and submission, and so the inner child went underground, not because she didn't want to live, but because it was never safe to be here. And now, decades later, you want to reconnect, you want to feel joy, to trust love, to reclaim that childlike wonder. But instead, you feel nothing. And here's what no one tells you. Numbness is not absence, it's protection. It's the nervous system saying, I had to go quiet so you could survive. Carl Jung didn't see this silence as failure. He saw it as a clue, a symbol. The child isn't lost, she's watching, waiting, hidden behind defense mechanisms so old you've mistaken them for personality. You say, I'm just detached. But maybe you're still waiting for the moment when being alive won't hurt. You say, I can't cry. But maybe you were taught that tears were dangerous. You say, I feel empty. But maybe you were never given the space to feel anything. This isn't resistance, this is survival. And survival is not your enemy. It's your history. Jung believed that the way back to the child is not through force, but through ritual, presence, and symbolic attention, because the inner child does not respond to logic. She responds to safety, to patience, to sincerity. She returns not when you demand it, but when you prove, slowly, consistently, that it's safe to be here now. This video is not about fixing yourself. It's about finding the part of you that never needed fixing, only witnessing. We'll explore why the inner child disappears, what blocks your access to her, and how Jung's work can guide you back, not just into feeling, but into belonging, to yourself again, because no matter how long it's been, you can still return. The child waits not in the past, but in the present you've been avoiding. She's not gone, she's frozen, and the moment you stop trying to heal her and start listening is the moment she starts to melt. Why you can't feel your inner child, and why that's not your fault. The inner child doesn't disappear. She adapts. He hides. They retreat, not out of weakness, but because it was the only way to stay alive in a world that didn't know how to hold them. Carl Jung understood this well. He believed that what we call the inner child is not a sentimental metaphor, but a real psychic structure, a living fragment of the self that was split off during moments of pain, humiliation, abandonment, or emotional neglect. And yet, so many people try to reconnect with this child through positive affirmations, meditations, or therapy exercises, only to feel nothing, no emotion, no image, just silence, just a flatness that feels like failure. But that silence, that numbness, it's not the absence of the child, it's the presence of protection. You see, when you dissociate as a child, when you learn to go blank to survive, that becomes your baseline. Your nervous system encodes it as normal, and Jung would say your psyche never betrays you. Even when it keeps you numb, it's trying to keep you safe. The problem is, you grew up, your body changed, your environment may have changed, but the protection stayed, and the child within you doesn't know that the war is over, because no one ever told her. No one ever sat beside him and said, you don't have to disappear anymore. So instead of feeling, you freeze. You stay in performance mode. You intellectualize everything. You build your identity around being resilient, strong, independent. But underneath, you're tired. So tired of holding it all together, of never being allowed to collapse. But here's the truth Jung gave us. You can't force the child to return. You can't shout through the silence. You can't meditate your way into reconnection if your body still believes that feeling is dangerous, because the child doesn't respond to effort. The child responds to safety. That's why so many people say things like, "I tried everything, but I still feel numb. I've done years of therapy, but I don't feel connected. I know what happened to me, but I still feel empty." Because knowing is not the same as integrating. The mind may understand the trauma, but the inner child is not stored in the mind. She's stored in the body, in the shadow, in the breath you keep shallow, in the shoulders you never let fall, in the voice you learn to quiet. And Jung taught that what remains in the shadow doesn't just disappear, it drives your life without your awareness. So if your child learned that crying led to rejection, then even now, as an adult, you might freeze every time grief rises. Not because you're broken, but because you were trained to believe that emotion is a threat. If your child learned that being visible brought pain, you might hide your truth, your creativity, your joy. Not because you lack those things, but because they were once punished. This is why Jung said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." Because the child doesn't go away. She shows up in patterns, in relationships, in reactions that seem irrational, in the panic that strikes when things get calm, in the anger that rises when someone gets too close. So how do we begin, Jung? Wouldn't say try harder. He would say make it symbolic, make it sacred, make it small, because the inner child doesn't respond to grand gestures. She watches for the quiet ones. She watches how you speak to yourself when you fail, how you breathe when you're overwhelmed. Whether you keep abandoning her to keep the peace with others, she returns through ritual, not through reasoning. So instead of trying to find the child, can you make space for her? Can you start noticing the moments you override your emotions and pause instead of pushing through? Can you start asking, what part of me is not being heard right now? Instead of, how do I fix this? Because this isn't about control, it's about connection. And connection takes time. The child doesn't trust your words. She trusts your consistency. Every time you choose to stay present when your instinct is to flee, you are proving to the child that she no longer has to protect you. Every time you allow your tears to fall without silencing them, you tell the child, "I'm not afraid of your sadness anymore." Every time you choose rest instead of numbing with productivity, you say, "Your needs matter now." This is how the child begins to emerge, not because you summoned her, but because you stopped running, because you gave her what she needed. All along, your presence, your softness, your willingness to feel what no one else allowed you to feel, and in that space, that quiet, imperfect, holy space, she begins to whisper again, not in words, but in breath, in warmth, in the faintest return of aliveness. That's how healing begins, not with a bang, but with a breath. Why you still can't feel? Guilt, collapse, and the fear of coming home to yourself. So many people begin their healing journey with hope. Hope that if they do enough work, if they show up to therapy, read the right books, speak the right affirmations, they'll finally feel whole. But what happens when the numbness stays? What happens when after all that effort you still feel empty? You begin to wonder if something's wrong with you. You begin to feel shame for not feeling, guilt for not being better yet, a quiet panic that maybe you're too far gone. But Carl Jung warned us about this. He called it the collapse of the ego, a necessary unraveling that often happens before real transformation can begin, because healing isn't linear, it's cyclical, and before the child can return, something inside you has to break, not violently, but gently, like a shell cracking open from the inside. And here's what makes it so hard. We weren't taught how to fall apart safely. We were taught to stay composed, to be strong, to keep moving. So when the body starts to soften, when tears come, or grief rises, or numbness begins to thaw, it feels like death, and in a way it is. Jung described this as a psychic death, the death of the role you played, the protector you became, the version of you that held everything together because no one else did. But death is not the end. It's the portal, and to walk through it, you have to face the things you were never allowed to feel, the rage at being neglected, the sadness of never being seen, the terror of being vulnerable, the guilt of choosing yourself. Yes, guilt. Because for Many, the deeper wound isn't just pain. It's the belief that healing is a betrayal. If your mother couldn't love you fully, how dare you love yourself? If your father abandoned you emotionally, how dare you ask someone else to stay? If your caregivers silenced you, how dare you find your voice now? This is not logic. This is loyalty, a hidden ancestral loyalty that Jung said lives in the unconscious. He believed we carry not only our own wounds, but the unlived lives of our parents. And so when we begin to heal, something in us whispers, if I thrive, I leave them behind. If I feel, I make their silence real. And so the child within you doesn't just hide to protect you, she hides to protect them. She believes that if she stays numb, maybe they'll hurt less. Maybe you'll stay safe in the familiar pain you've always known. But Jung was clear. This isn't healing. This is a psychic prison. Because numbness at its root is grief withheld. It's the emotion that was never allowed to move. And grief isn't just sadness. It's the death of a hope you didn't know you were still carrying. The hope that they'll finally say sorry. The hope that the past will be rewritten. The hope that someone will rescue the child you used to be. But no one is coming. And as heartbreaking as that sounds, it's also what sets you free. Because now finally you get to choose something different. Not from revenge, not from blame, but from truth. The truth that your suffering doesn't keep anyone safe. The truth that love rooted in self-abandonment is not love. The truth that your parents' pain is not your responsibility. Jung believed that we begin to heal not by destroying the past, but by releasing the identification with it. You are not the child waiting to be rescued. You are the adult choosing to come home. And coming home doesn't mean spiritual perfection. It means sitting in the discomfort without collapsing. It means letting the numbness speak without judging what it says. It means feeling the fear rise in your chest and whispering to it, I'm not going anywhere. Because the child inside doesn't need you to be enlightened. She needs you to be present, to sit beside her, to breathe, to stop running, to let the tears fall. Not for drama, but for release. That's what Jung meant by integration. It's not the elimination of pain. It's the willingness to hold pain without abandoning yourself. It's the sacred act of becoming your own witness when no one else could be. So if you still feel numb, if you feel frozen, if you feel like you're watching your life from a distance, you are not broken. You are not beyond repair. You are still protecting something sacred. And the child within you, she hasn't given up. She's just waiting for your permission. Permission to feel, to rest, to trust, to live without apology. And that permission doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments, when you choose softness over self-punishment, when you say no without guilt, when you cry and don't explain, when you laugh without bracing for loss. Each of these moments rewrites the story. Each of them tells the child, you're not a burden. You're a miracle, and that changes everything. How to truly meet your inner child. Carl Jung and the return to the self. There is no map for this. No perfect method. No 5-step checklist that guarantees reconnection. Meeting your inner child is not a task. It's a return. A sacred remembering. Of something you didn't lose but had to leave behind. Carl Jung called this the individuation process, the path of returning to your whole self, where the exiled parts no longer live in the shadows, but walk beside you. And at the heart of this journey is the child, not the innocent fantasy version, but the real one. The one with trembling hands, 2 big eyes, and a voice that learned to whisper so quietly, you forgot it was even there. Jung didn't teach us to rescue this child. He taught us to relate to it, to stop projecting it onto others, to stop expecting someone else to do what only we are meant to do. Because here's the truth, no one else can meet your inner child for you. Not your partner, not your therapist. Not even the version of you that built a perfect life. The only one who can truly meet the child is the part of you that's willing to feel again. So, where do we begin? Jung believed that the unconscious speaks through symbol, not through logic. That's why the child often shows up in dreams, not as a perfect image, but as a lost animal, a locked room, a crying infant, or even a place you can't quite reach. It's not trying to confuse you. It's trying to communicate in the language of the soul, and so instead of forcing a feeling, you begin with presence, with curiosity, with willingness. Jung called this active imagination, a practice of entering into dialogue with the parts of you that have been forgotten. You don't need to see your inner child clearly at first, you just need to sit down, close your eyes, and ask, where are you? What do you need me to see? What do you wish someone had said to you back then? And then you listen not with your ears, but with your body, your breath, your dreams. At first there may be nothing, that's okay. The child may not trust you yet. Imagine it. Would you run into the arms of someone who spent years criticizing you, ignoring you, rushing you? Of course not. And that's why the most powerful act you can offer the child is not a promise, but consistency. Keep returning. Even when you feel nothing, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then, because the moment you stop demanding emotion and start creating space for it to emerge, that's when things begin to shift. And when it does, when the image starts to form, when the memory surfaces, when the ache rises in your chest, don't run, breathe, stay, listen. You might hear, why didn't anyone protect me? Why did I have to be the strong one? Why wasn't I enough for them to love me? And your job is not to fix those questions. It's to hold them, to witness what no one else could bear to face, because the child never needed a perfect parent. She needed someone to sit with her in the fire without flinching. That's the healing. It's not changing the past. It's changing your relationship to it. It's saying to the child, you didn't deserve that, mate. You didn't make it up. You were never too much. You don't have to carry that anymore. And most of all, I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. Jung knew that these words, when spoken sincerely, don't just echo into nothing. They echo into the unconscious. They reach places the mind alone could never go. Because healing isn't mental. It's relational. It's rebuilding trust with the soul you abandoned to survive. And yes, it's terrifying. But it's also beautiful, because eventually, the child begins to play again, to speak, to show you the things you once loved, to guide you back to creativity, wonder, softness, the very things that were shut down by pain. This is not regression. It's resurrection, and slowly you'll begin to notice subtle changes. You pause before reacting, you breathe deeper, you let joy linger without guilt, you cry without collapse. These aren't coincidences. They are signs of integration. You're no longer pushing the child away, you're walking with them, and that is where your power lives. Because when the child is welcomed, you stop seeking validation. You stop begging others to love what you still reject. You begin to choose, to create, to express. Not from fear, but from fullness. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the self, the part of you that contains all the rest, the child, the parent, the rebel, the dreamer. And when you stand in that self, no longer fractured, no longer ashamed, you begin to live differently. You don't wait to be rescued. You rescue yourself, not because no one else cared, but because now, finally, you do. The child returns. When you stop abandoning yourself, there will come a moment, quiet, ordinary, when you do something different. You pause instead of pleasing. You speak instead of shrinking. You feel instead of fleeing. And in that moment, you won't hear a trumpet or see a vision or feel fireworks of transformation. You'll just breathe, and that breath, uninterrupted, unjudged, will be the sign that the child has come home, not as a memory, but as presence, as voice, as instinct. You won't have to look for her anymore. You'll feel her, in the gentleness you extend to yourself, in the boundaries you hold without apology, in the joy that rises without explanation. Carl Jung never promised healing would be easy. He promised it would be whole, and wholeness is not perfection. It's integration. It's the sacred return of the parts you once silenced in order to survive. The child does not come back through force. She returns through permission, through stillness, through breath. She returns when you stop abandoning her to win the love of others, when you stop asking the world to heal what only you are meant to hold. And when she returns, so do you. You remember who you were before the shame, before the masks, Before the world told you you were too much or not enough, you return to the root, to the beginning, to the one who still believes it's possible to live with an open heart. And that's where peace begins, not in forgetting the past, but in refusing to let it define your future. If something in you stirred during this message, then the child is already listening. And that's enough. You're not lost. You're returning, and you're not alone. In the pinned comment, I've left something created with deep care, a resource for those who are ready to walk this path with intention, a quiet companion for the nights when silence feels loud, a reminder that your healing is not only possible, it is sacred. And if you feel called to walk this journey together, subscribe, not for more content, but for the connection you've always deserved.